Hi everyone. It's always a pleasure to welcome you into my shop. I've been in my shop since before the sun rose this morning. It's late afternoon now. I've been out here working on a couple of flutes, an A and a G. And as I work, I'm always thinking and contemplating and gaining better understanding of who I am and why I do what I do and why I do it the way I do it. I spend a lot of time talking to my father, talking to myself, but today was no different. I talked to myself quite a bit. But I was looking back at how long I've been making flutes. It's been many, many, many years, and I always feel myself very blessed because I learned from the hands of another flute maker how to make my flutes. The old man taught me how to voice and how to tune and how to measure. And we would do all that while we sat by the fire and drank coffee and told stories. It was a real special time in my life. Excuse me. But as I grew as a flute maker, the old man's gone. I don't know where he is. He may have passed on. I haven't had communication with him for many, many years, but as I grew as a flute maker, I started looking at how I made my flutes, and I tried to stay true to what he taught me, but I also wanted to fit into the marketplace, so to speak. So at the turn of the century, after I had done recording and playing music and flute making, I hunkered down in my shop. I was in a new shop out in the country. It was a big, beautiful shop. Had a recording studio right in the other room, and the shop was 3 times the size I have now. I started working on the internet and understanding the internet and all of the different types of flutes people were making and what the market was really asking for. And I began to focus my attention toward those things. I was doing a lot of inlay work. I was using multiple woods in a flute. I was using exotic woods. I used burls. I used crotchet woods. I used quilted woods, all sorts of different types of woods from all over the world. And it was good. I made good flutes, and I was for a while I was happy with what I was doing, and I learned a lot. But as time went on, the thrill of making the flute started to leave, because I was doing what people wanted me to do rather than what I wanted to do. And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why I felt the way I felt. You know, a lot of people would say, well, you know, making flutes, you know, you love what you do. I said, well, yeah. But sometimes I didn't love what I did. And it made it very difficult to be a flute maker. I began to think of myself not as a flute maker, but more of just a guy making flutes, you know, which is not what I wanted to be. It was after my father passed that I was at the Sunwatch Flute Festival. And I was sitting with my brother Billy Krobeek and John Pink and Leonard McGon. And we were just sitting in the afternoon talking while people were milling about. And we were talking about how we learned to make flutes and the way we learned to make it in an old way, you know, by the hands of another, and alternative tunings like the grandfather tunings, and all of these things that I was taught in the very beginning. And I left that day and returned to my studio, my shop, and I thought about everything we talked about. And I thought about how much I missed that. And I decided to begin a journey. I had strayed so far off my path that I had to almost step backwards several steps to find who I really was and what my flutes really meant to me. So I began to um, reminisce about my days with the old man, and all the little things he taught me, and some of the things he didn't teach me, he just expected me to learn. He was good for stuff like that. But I began to look at the purity of my instruments once again. Not so much how flashy they could be or how fancy of wood I could use, but I started to look at my very humble beginnings, and the tone that I got from my flutes, and the feel that I got from my flutes. I started to search for that again. And it took me way, way back to almost 30 years ago, probably more than that. But I got away completely from using exotic woods. One reason was I had a piece of wood that made me very ill one day. And the other is I didn't want to be flashy anymore. I wanted to make a flute that I was happy with. I wanted to make a flute that I enjoyed making, that I enjoyed playing. That's what I wanted to find in my flute working again. That was the goal. In fact, if you go on YouTube and review some of my videos from 5 years ago, I was talking about that very thing, because I was in a transition of moving to those other flutes, moving back to the purity of the instrument rather than the flashiness and pleasing the marketplace. I guess you would say, that's lack of a better word, but that's what I wanted to get away from. I wanted to be happy with what I did again. So I stopped using all those hardwoods and all those fancy woods, and I started. I put the ruler away. I hung it on the wall, and I took the calipers and put it away in the cabinet, and I turned my tuner off, and I started to return to the way he taught me, measuring things with my hands and laying things out with my thumb and my fingers, and listening to the flute rather than checking to see if it matched a tuner. Listening to how the flute reacted to itself. I started doing everything by feel. I still do. I don't think I'm going to change. When I shape a flute, I know a lot of flute makers nowadays have sophisticated CNC equipment, which is fine if that's what they want to do. But they can actually do every flute exactly the same dimensions, which is amazing. I don't want to do that. I want each flute to be its own. I want each flute to have its own personality. I don't want each flute to play like each other flute. I want it to play with its own life, with its own spirit. So when I shape a flute, I shape it by hand, and it's a feel. I feel and I listen to when that flute is done, when that flute is ready. Amazingly enough, like this flute, when I got done shaping it this morning, it was exactly the right wall thickness that I was looking for. And that happens a lot. I had a flute maker ask me one day on my true sound hole, which I use round. You know, I don't want to scare anybody, but I use a round sound hole. A lot of people say I should use square, but the old man taught me to use a round, and damn it, I'm going to use a round. But he asked me what angle I put on my true sound hole. And I just looked at him and I said, well, I don't know. I guess it's the right one. I don't measure that. I just do it when I voice the flute. And I don't do it until after I'm ready to voice the flute. I don't do it prior to gluing the flute together or anything like that. A lot of them do, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. But I like to do it afterward, and then I blow across it, and I know it's right. But that's one thing that I do. And I also went back to using cedar. For me, in the very beginning, cedar gave me the most beautiful tone. Cedar gave me the warmth of the tone. Cedar gave me the vibration in the instrument when I played it. Um, Cedar to me was a more traditional wood to use rather than these other hardwoods and things like that. Cedar felt right. Now I use Western cedar, and when I can get decent Eastern cedar, I use Eastern cedar. But those are the two basic woods that I use. I still have some walnut and some cherry and some birch and some other woods. Um, I've got some sassafras that makes a really nice flute. But those are woods that I got from people. I wouldn't go seek them out. It's not my plan to use those woods. But if I have it here in the shop and it was a gift from someone, I'll use it. I mean, I'm not stupid. Anyway, I focus more on the purity of the instrument. I've gotten away from the inlay work. I've gotten away from the multiple woods. I've gotten away from the flashiness. I like to use wood burning and hand painting more now. I like to add color to the flute with the paint. I work mostly with red and blue because it represents the two good days, and I believe that our flutes should reflect our spirit and what we believe in. So that's how I do my flutes. I use this block here as a standard block, and it represents water flowing in a stream. And it was from a lesson that I was given a long time ago from one of my uncles about water flowing in the stream. I do, this is an A flute, and it's all laid out using my hands and my fingers and my thumbs. It's 7 hands long, because that's what the old man taught me. The flute should be 7 hands long, which actually is the length of my arm. So I actually had a flute maker at a show one day tell one of my customers that cedar was not a good flute wood. And I couldn't, there was, Billy was standing next to me when the customer said that. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and we both looked over at that flute maker that told that person that. And we didn't comment. We didn't comment, but we did know that his flutes were made out of oak, which in my opinion is not a good flute wood. Oak is furniture wood. I grew up in furniture. Oak is furniture wood. I've always told people when they ask about finding their first flute that they should buy a flute from a reputable flute maker. And there are many, many, many out there. There are some that I would recommend, mostly because I know how they make their flutes, and I can relate to how they make their flutes. There's Billy Crowbeak, Brian Akipa. That's a flute maker there. Paul Nelson, he's a newer flute maker, but he's following the path. There's just so many, many others, you know, that I could name that I have a great deal of respect for. Even some of those that use only machines, I have a great deal of respect for their flutes too. They have earned their dues. They have, they make beautiful flutes, and they play very, very well. They have a lot to be proud of. But for me, it's my way. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm the best flute maker in the world. Far from it. But I know that when I complete an instrument, when it's all done, it's because I'm pleased with what I've done. It's because I am proud to be carrying on that tradition that the old man taught me, still today. And I know I have a young man that I've been teaching for a long time now how to make flutes, and he's determined to carry it on the same way. I'm very proud of that, very proud of him. He makes a great flute. I made him do one completely by hand, no machines, nothing. And it was a beautiful flute. And on that day I told him, you know, you did it, son. I played it for a lot of people. But I don't want to ramble on all day, because My wife will tell you that that's what I like to do. But I just wanted you, I always tell people to make sure that you know your flute maker. Make sure you know where he comes from and what he does and how he feels about his flutes. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video today. But find a reputable flute maker and make sure that you are in line with the way he thinks and the way he feels. And buy a flute that's in good tune also. A flute that you can enjoy playing. Some flutes, they're all good flutes. There's a reason they were made. They were made for someone. But some flutes don't play as easily as others. So find one that plays right for you. One that feels good in your hands. One that feels good when you give it breath. And if you ever want a recommendation on flute makers that I believe in, that I would recommend, don't hesitate to ask, Al. It doesn't have to be one of my flutes, although my wife she'll tell me that I should say it should be one of my flutes. I'll get beamed in the head when she sees this video. But it doesn't matter whose flute you get, as long as you get the flute that is right for you, okay? I'm very pleased with what I do today. I'm still doing the carved end flutes. I'm still making a beautiful flute with the wood burning and the paint. And I'm very, very pleased with how my flutes play and how they feel and how I feel when I have them done. So if you ever need anything, I'm Douglas Thunderhorse. See, Thunderhorse flutes. Isn't that cool? And look at my coffee cup. That's one of the perks of having a beautiful brother taking care of you. I thank you very much. But if you ever need anything, if you ever have any questions or anything at all, just don't hesitate to ask. And I'll have you back in the studio or in the shop one. A lot of people have asked me about this old hat that I've been wearing for, gosh, 18 years now. And there's a story behind this hat. It's a great story, and I'll share that with you someday. But thanks for stopping in today, and thanks for allowing me to be me in my flutes. I feel blessed that you accept my instruments for who and what they are. Thank you very much.